Hello everybody, this is Simon with Let's Play Sonic 2006. This is the last silver very hard level, and I only died once trying to get the S rank. I just wanted to use this opportunity while I'm showing you this to tell you this is actually the first S rank I did, because I felt like Flame Core was going to be the hardest challenge because it is a very long, a very boring level, and thus if I could do this, then probably all the other levels would be fine, right? Yeah, as you have probably noticed if you did watch all of the others, that was definitely not the case. I did Kingdom Valley, and then I did Crisis City and walked straight into a wall of going like, oh, this is actually a bit tougher than I thought it would be. Because sadly, Flame Core doesn't really have any gimmicks to it. During the normal run I almost managed an S rank anyway, and in this case it's just like, yeah, you go through there, you don't die, and try not to take too long, you know how it is. It's not very complicated overall, and you still have all of those wave fights, and you see that I did pull off these shortcuts here, but even getting the first one doesn't really do anything for me. It's like you don't really save time for being clever. You don't get any extra points by like killing enemies in a certain way. Like all of these leader type enemies that you kill one and then everybody dies and you get a bunch of points, that is so clever. In the other levels that's just not present, because once again the Iblis enemies, they are very rarely designed to have this. It is possible, sometimes there is a worm, a big guy, where if you kill everybody else dies, but they don't really do that often, and I don't really understand it. But also it's very hard to communicate, I feel like, because maybe I'm missing them, you know. It is not entirely obvious if an enemy is a leader or not, because there is no clear indication for the Iblis enemies. For the Robotnik ones, it's absolutely clear. There's this red robot, and there are the otherwise colored bike ones and so on, and usually a big one also tends to be a leader enemy. So it's just like very clear, and the gimmick is clear, and the invisible ones, of course, yeah, and you can even hide them behind corners and so on. It's all really cool, and you can do something with it. And once again, it's just like, this is probably one of the major failing points for Silver, in my opinion, is that the Iblis enemies are bad. It's not terribly, it's not necessarily that Silver is completely unplayably terrible on his own, even though, you know, he comes close. He's not that fun, I will fully admit to that. But he's also getting really screwed by just the fact that all of the opponents he fights in most of his levels are just extremely tedious, boring, and the main thing of throwing back projectiles just doesn't work. They don't fire often enough. Most of them don't even fire projectiles. The basic Robotnik enemies do, and that is why they are better to fight with Silver and Sonic and Shadow, but specifically and especially Silver. But yeah, that is just a general issue while, you know, we're going through this. Yeah, you know, you've seen this before, but at least I figured out how to get the 1-up earlier. You have to use the momentum of the spring, and then just don't float down. That's something, isn't it? I am learning here. There is a little bit of value to be gained in replaying it. I was a bit too fast here, but again, doesn't matter. Fortunately, there is no real trick to this S rank. Unfortunately, it's not very fun because of that, but it's fine. If you get hit, you don't need these rings. It's definitely different from the Kingdom Valley one and all of the others, where it's really a struggle to try not to get hit late in the level. But here it just doesn't matter. It's okay. It's whatever. Just do your thing, kill all the enemies efficiently. Use the Psyblast again and again and again and again to stun them and take them out at the same time. Yeah, it's Silver gameplay in Flame Core. But this is also the last time that I'm going to be playing as Silver for this Let's Play, so it's a good opportunity to talk about some general things. You know, that's just about how I started this video. Again, I do think that Silver has a lot of potential. There is a lot of things to be done with him throwing back projectiles is inherently, in my opinion, just a fun thing to do. It's like using enemies' weapons against them. That's great. That's good design, and a lot of games using this principle thrive, and people like them. There is any sort of reflection powers are cool. It's like parrying as well. That's basically a huge sub-genre at the moment of games. It's a huge trend. But generally just picking up stuff, throwing it back, it's a cool thing to do. It's great, and you can do a lot with that. But it's sadly very, very dependent on your engine being good, and I'm just not gonna finish that sentence. Whereas even here you have some moments of it being cool. There's plenty of robot fights which I actually genuinely enjoy. But for most of these, the problem is really not that much the engine as well. It's first of all that if you do want to use Silver's powers, it's fine. You can learn how to do that. Like I have plenty of experience using Silver, and I generally know how to pick up a projectile and throw it back at enemies in a way that works. That's not a given, of course, considering the game we're talking about, but I feel confident enough to say, okay, yeah, sure, I'm a certain distance to you, and if I throw it back, I make sure that I jump first, for example, so that the object doesn't collide with the floor. All of these tiny details, as a first timer, it's really frustrating. But if you are getting used to the game like I am, you can learn that. It's fine, you can get good at Silver combat. That's not the real issue. The real issue is that you do have an extremely overpowered ability in the Psycho Shock, which I keep using, and sadly not again. You don't get hit here. I'm sorry. The last opportunity, one of the last opportunities for that to happen, so just the mechanical mastery is not the issue. The issue really is that the enemies don't shoot often enough, that the setups are not designed for you to do that, so that it is always better to just shock and kill them, unless you get a certain incentive to not do so, and the only one that I found is enemies that give you points by the leader type system. That's the only thing that kept me from just killing everything with a Psycho Shock in Crisis City, because I hadn't figured out yet that if you throw them against the wall, then the entire group dies. But even there, if you accidentally pick up two of the same group, then the points for the normal enemy are lost, right? You want to only kill the leader. It is a surprisingly deep system with a lot of ramifications for how to best use it. That's not a bad thing in general, and this is an organic way to get you to not use an overpowered ability. I do kind of like it, and I do think that it was kind of intentional, and once again, it's a bit of a shame that they are not doing that here. I realize now that this turns on all of these platforms, which makes no sense because I've already passed all of these platforms. So yeah, I didn't spend too much time figuring out how these rooms actually work, because they, again, don't make much sense to me, and I just want it to be done because these rooms suck. But yeah, back to the general issue. Once again, the problem is mostly that it is too efficient to Psycho Shock them, and it is too boring not to do it. That's basically it. There's lots of games where you get an overpowered ability, where you're like, okay, I'm just going to spam this for the rest of the game, right? Because this is so good, and it's fun to do that. Like, think of most Metroid games where you're like, okay, I got the final beam upgrade. I got the plasma beam in Metroid Prime 1. That's just a prime example of you get a late game upgrade. It's not even that late. It's like somewhat 2/3 of the game, and you get a beam that is obviously, objectively, the best thing to use against most enemies, and then you just blast them away, and anything that was a problem before, like flying pirates and so on, they just melt, literally, and that's great. It feels so good because you suddenly have a tool against enemies that annoyed you so much. And the thing is, you are still using the normal rules of the game. You're just still shooting things in the normal engine that you have at your disposal. So it's not like the challenge is completely gone. You just kill things faster, and you still have to dodge, and there's plenty of enemies that are still immune to it, and so on. And it's almost like they kind of try to do that here with all the enemies that are shielded. but then they drop their shield faster than they fire projectiles so that you can retaliate against them. It is still more efficient to wait for them to drop the shield than it is to wait for them to shoot projectiles. And this is a real big failure here, because generally waiting for an enemy to lower its shield so that you can then use an ability on them is a good thing. You can learn that as a player and figure out, hey, this is actually a cool trick that I can use, right? It's like you figure out the enemy's attack timings and see, okay, after this certain attack they are open, during this attack, for example, not. And here, for example, you always have to wait for this guy to throw his rock. You can only hit through his shield when it's doing the slam attack, and he was preparing the slam attack. Now I know that because whenever I'm close to it, it always does a slam attack. And this is very consistent. Even in a game like this, you can figure these things out. The consistency, the enemy behavior is programmed. Somebody spent time on this and they had a thought behind that. And it is very good in that sense. Even these enemies, which I don't like, have their own complexities to them. And you can manipulate them, for example. Here I was deliberately going close enough to the giant so that he would use its ground pound attack, which I know is going to open it up for a stun. And that is not a bad thing in general. Like, it's very samey because you have a lot of them. But for the first few times when I figured it out, I was feeling like a genius, right? And if you haven't figured out that this is what I'm doing, this is very deliberate again. I'm not just randomly side-shocking all the time and hoping for the best. It's definitely not the case. I very, very rarely activate the shield on the enemies because I know what I'm doing. And this is something that you can learn, and that's good in general. It's fine. And this is why it's so sad, because it's so close to being good. It's very, very, very close. You can almost have here a system, you almost see a system at play here, where you have a very deliberate payoff between waiting for the enemies to lower their shield versus just killing them directly, knowing exactly how to get them to lower their shield, reading all of their attack timings, figuring out for yourself, is it actually safe to let the enemy attack here, or should I preemptively try to kill them? Should I coax them into doing something that is bad for them, good for me? There are some situations here where, for example, in the last room, I was taking my time, keeping my distance to the enemies shooting at me from across the room, because if you remember, that was the exact situation that killed me in that one failure run that I showed at the start. It was like these two worms and the giant across a chasm in a room which tends to hit me because the previous setup is complete garbage, and then it's like very easy to lose your rings and go in there with 0 rings, and that is very bad because these enemies can quickly kill you. The giant is protected with his shield, the worms are extremely hard to Psycho Shock without getting hit yourself, so that's not a bad setup. And it told me basically the safest course of action for you is to stay back and take out at least one of the worms by throwing back its projectiles. Takes much longer than you would like, it's tedious, it's a little bit annoying, but it's a tactical decision, and you do feel smart for figuring out the way to handle an obstacle in the game. This is good design, in my opinion, right? And there are a lot of moments like this, which I can't comment on all of these, right? There's plenty of small details here and there where I'm like, okay, I'm trying to be a little bit clever here, and I am making Silver gameplay work for me. And again, this is why, even for Silver, where we can all agree that this is definitely the biggest failure of this game, because Sonic and Shadow inherently are much, much more fun to play than Silver is. You have to say it like it is. There are still lots of ways to make Silver fun and work for you. Thank you for disproving the point by not grabbing these stupid projectiles. And again, having these micro decisions where you are feeling like you are doing something smart. Like here I was like, I need to get behind that barrier. I can't take out the flying enemies ahead of time because I will get hit by the orb. So I'm positioning myself behind the barrier. I'm deliberately staying away far enough from the trigger point for my telekinesis on the ground, because I know if I try to use my psychic abilities there, then Silver will bend down like this and not pick up the projectiles, which is an engine failure, yes, but it's something I can work around with and feel smart for countering, and it's consistent. And once again, if it had actually worked, that I would be able to pick up all the projectiles because Silver's pickup cone is badly programmed, then it would have been a great moment, and I felt very smart for that. But that is the thing. I feel like Silver is, let's say, 80% of the way there to being fun, whereas the other hedgehogs are 90% there if you know what you're doing. But even if you know what you're doing, Silver often doesn't cross that finish line. I have, however, and I thank you for sticking with me all this time with Silver. Thank you very much for your attention.